Sean, you're talking about kind of the difference between being numbers based and data based and being emotional in your decisions. It's kind of tempting to get emotional, whether like you drive past a little apartment building and you're like, it's so cute. I love that building. I want to buy that building. Even though your numbers tell you this is not a good deal, you should not buy this. You get emotionally invested, or like you tour it and you're like, oh, I met the tenants and the tenants are awesome. There's this cute dog there, or it's on this street. I grew up on that street, or my uncle lives down the street. And so, like, these are all terrible reasons to buy a property.
Welcome to the Teacher Money Show, the podcast dedicated to helping teachers navigate your unique financial challenges and unlock your financial superpowers. I'm your host, Sean Morgan, a full-time educator and personal financial coach and speaker. And I'm here to help every teacher, whether you're a seasoned teacher looking for fresh insights or a new educator navigating your first paycheck, to have a richer wallet, classroom, and life. I am super excited to have Jonathan Hayek on the show today. Jonathan was a public school teacher, and then he started to invest in real estate with only a few dollars. Through grit and creative strategies, he flipped single-family homes to build a portfolio of small multifamily properties. Now, using real estate to fuel his lifestyle of family time and playing in the mountains, Jonathan now invests in single-tenant industrial properties, and he just enjoys inspiring others and speaking to them about the freedom of real estate, which is why I brought him on the show today, specifically to talk to us about a lesser looked at piece of real estate investing, and that is commercial real estate investing. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me, Sean.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk about this, but I first want to know a little bit about you. So I always want to know just how did you get into education? Because that's, always an interesting story. And then how did you get into commercial real estate? And then on top of that, why commercial instead of residential to really make this a long answer?
Sure. Yeah. So I started my working career out of college as a special education teacher. My dad was a high school Spanish teacher for 34 years. And I guess I got the teaching gene. And so I went into special ed straight out of college. And I ended up teaching for about 8 years at various levels. I taught kindergarteners and first graders. I taught junior high. I taught high school. And I loved teaching, but ultimately, I just felt like teaching long term was not going to get me and my family where we wanted to go. I remember this moment. I was talking with my wife. We'd been married maybe 2 years at the time. And I just said to her, we're just not going to make very much money. She was working at a non for profit at the time. I was a teacher making $54,000 a year. And we had these big, kind of lofty ambitions of having freedom and traveling and international travel. And I just kind of had this moment where I was like, man, I'm just not going to get to where I want to go. And actually slept on that. And I woke up the next day thinking, no, I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay. I was like 33 years old at the time, and I said, no, you know what? That this is where I am now, but I'm not okay with being here for the rest of my life. I'm still a young guy, and so that's when I started. I got the idea to start flipping houses, and I did it, and I used the proceeds of my house flips to buy small multifamily properties. And so those are duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, just little apartment buildings. And within about 18 months of starting that, I had duplicated my teacher salary with rental income. And so that was a moment at which we said, should if I dedicated myself full time to real estate, what could we accomplish? And so that was June 2019 was when I stopped teaching, pursued real estate full time, and continued with that residential track for another few years. And then it was really about 2022, 23 that I started pursuing the commercial route. And I'm not here to tell you that commercial is better than residential or anything like that. It was really more of a lifestyle choice. Some commercial properties can be, there's some nuances to commercial properties that can be more passive and less management intensive than residential properties. And so that's why I've chosen to go the commercial route. But plenty of people go the residential route and have great success and achieve freedom in the residential route. But I'm currently pursuing the commercial route and having some success there.
Awesome. So commercial real estate was a choice, just not because it's inherently better, but just because it's where you ended up. And I'm going to be honest, the reason why I'm having Jonathan on, not only because he's a former teacher, which I always like to talk to teachers, but also because I'm interested in the commercial real estate versus the residential real estate. Just wanting to know like what the differences are and how you can get into commercial and things like that. So this is an entirely selfish episode. Hopefully you get something from it, everybody as well. But I always believe, as we as teachers know, that it's important to start by defining your terms. So, what is commercial real estate?
Commercial real estate in general is defined as anything that's non-residential. So think about warehouses on the side of the highway or in the industrial part of town. Think about retail strip centers where you might get your nails done or go to the grocery store, get your hair cut. Those are retail centers. That's commercial. Large multifamily apartment complexes are considered commercial. Anything above 4 units is considered commercial. So think about an apartment complex with 100 units and a swimming pool and a dog park. That's considered commercial real estate. Think about a medical office building where you might get outpatient surgery or go to the dentist or go to the doctor's office. That's commercial real estate. When we talk about residential, generally, those are single family homes, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. Anything other than that is considered commercial.
All right. So, this is probably one of the biggest sectors like you can go into. Like, yeah, residential, of course, there's always residential options, but like residential is houses, and this is pretty much anything else that you can buy, except for maybe not land. Land would be a little different. So that is what we're talking about. So if we're saying to ourselves something like, I can't do commercial real estate, we got to realize that it's such a broad term that there's something you probably can do.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of times commercial deals are bigger. If you want to buy, a 100 unit apartment complex, that might cost $30 million. If you want to buy a medical office building that's 4 or 5 stories high with all of these different doctors in it, that might be $8 or $10 million. But then there are these other buildings that might be 150 or $200,000 that might appear to be very unsexy, but might produce stable cash flow over time. And so just because you hear the word commercial, don't automatically assume that it's too expensive, out of reach. That could be true for some of it, but there could be other types of properties that are attainable for pretty average people.
Just like you can find a house, trust me, Californians, you can find a house for like $50,000 in the Midwest, and you can find a house for $50 million. There is a wide range of what you can purchase in commercial real estate. So you decided to go into commercial real estate. You talked a little bit about that. But I just want to know like pros and cons for this. Like when you were weighing commercial versus residential, what was the pros that made you say this is a good investment, this is what I want? What are the cons of going to commercial versus, residential?
When I was in residential and still in commercial, I'm a DIYer to a fault. So I am my own property manager. If there's an apartment to fill, if there was an apartment to fill, I was the guy filling it. If there was a maintenance issue, I was the guy getting that phone call. And you can save a lot of money and make more money doing it that way, but it gets old. And so I did it that way for 5 or 6 years. And it got to a point where then I started having kids and the kids started growing up. And I was like, man, I do not want to continue self managing these residential properties anymore. So, what are my other options? My first commercial property was a little office building. I bought a vacant office building and fixed it up and rented it out and leased it up to full occupancy and then sold it. That experience told me that I didn't want to own office buildings. I learned a million lessons on that, but I didn't want to own office buildings. There's this other asset class of warehouses, single tenant warehouses, that was really intriguing to me. And the big advantage of these single tenant warehouses is they have what's called a net lease, or you might also hear it called a triple net lease. What this means is the tenant is largely responsible for almost all of the expenses. So the nets are taxes, insurance, and maintenance. And with a net lease or a triple net lease, the tenant, not the owner, the tenant occupying the property, is responsible for those three things. So, property taxes, tenant pays. Property insurance, tenant pays. If something is happening maintenance wise, in most cases, the tenant is responsible for that. And so, as I got the idea to invest out of state, and I live in a very expensive place, I don't invest where I live. I own a lot of properties in the Midwest. I didn't want to be getting phone calls in the middle of the night about who knows what. And so these net leases were really attractive. They're pretty passive. They're very low management. It doesn't mean nothing can go wrong, but there are much fewer things that can go wrong. And so it was the net leases of these single tenant buildings that really attracted me to the commercial side.
So just to clarify, for a triple net lease, does it need to be a single tenant building? Can you get triple net leases on multi-tenant buildings, or is that exclusive thing to single tenants?
Yep. So you can. There are plenty of multi tenant buildings that have net leases. The difference is in the management. So in a single tenant building, if the grass needs to be mowed, if the snow needs to be plowed, if exterior lights go out, it's the tenant that takes care of it because there's no one else to do it. The tenant's responsible for mowing the lawn and plowing snow and whatnot. In multi tenant properties, it's a little different. The tenants are still responsible for paying it, but it's more of a bill back scenario, whereas the owner or property manager is actually still responsible for doing those things, hiring the landscaping company, replacing the exterior lighting, filling potholes in the parking lot. But then they can bill back the tenants for those items. And so financially, it should still be a wash. But I personally don't want the management of getting the call from a tenant saying, "Hey, the snowplow guy hasn't come yet. We can't get our trucks out." I don't want that phone call. I want the 100% of the responsibility to be on the tenant, and you can do that in a single tenant building.
All right, awesome. Yeah, I love that distinction that it's possible in both situations, but single tenant is the least amount of effort possible, which is what it seems like you're going for. Are there any downsides to commercial real estate compared to residential?
Sure. So I think the biggest criticism of my chosen asset class, single tenant, is the question I always get is what happens if it goes vacant? Because in a multi-tenant property, if you have five tenants there, one of the suites goes vacant. Well, you still have four suites that are paying and paying rent, but you only have a single tenant. If it goes vacant, then you have zero income, and that's a valid concern. And so there are things that I do to try to mitigate it. It doesn't mean it never happens. It doesn't mean they never go vacant, but you do things to try to mitigate that. And everything in life is a trade-off, and so you're trading off the potential downside of having it go vacant with the low management.
Okay, so I mean, like vacancy is a problem in residential real estate too. I am constantly putting new tenants in.
Sure.
Um, but I feel like it is a little different finding someone who is going to rent a warehouse versus rent an apartment, right? Um, so first of all, how do you keep tenants in there? And second of all, how do you go about finding them? Because I've seen way too many commercial properties with space for lease for months and months and months and months. So I'm just curious, like, what are your steps you take to get these things rented quickly?
Yeah, so it is generally not my strategy to have a vacant building. I want my tenants to stay. And so a couple things I do to try to ensure that on the front end when I'm purchasing, I try to buy properties that have rent that's below market. And so if and when that lease does come up and the tenant is like, well, I'd kind of like to stay, but what's the new lease rate going to be like? They're already paying below market. So even if I increase rents, they might still be below market or at market. And so that's fair for me and it's fair for the tenant. And so you have to understand that it's a lot of work and a lot of hassle for these tenants to move buildings. So you have to kind of get inside their head and understand what they're thinking, and understand that it's a big pain for tenants to move. And so if you can be a fair landlord and offer a fair rate, and you buy a building that's below market and then raise rents over time, it can be a win for you as the landlord and a win for the tenant as they get to stay in their building. Another thing that I like to do is make sure that I'm buying a desirable building. And so buying buildings in the middle of town, not on the outskirts of town, not in the middle of nowhere. Buy in what's called infill locations. And so this is in the middle of town where there are lots of businesses around and lots of businesses that would like to be in that location. Buying a desirable building, location wise and characteristic wise. So making sure in my case, there's a very small amount of office space, nice warehouse space with bay doors, maybe a dock door, a very vanilla building, maybe some outside storage. I'm describing the kind of building that lots and lots of tenants would be interested in. Just kind of understanding your asset class, knowing what's desirable, and buying properties that you can cover your downside with. So if it does go vacant, you feel pretty confident that you can fill it at the same rate and fill it in a reasonable amount of time.
What is a reasonable amount of time to fill a vacant commercial property?
I would say anywhere from 3 to 12 months. So in the commercial world, you do have to be a little bit better capitalized, especially if you have loans and mortgages from banks. Whereas, if it does go vacant, you're going to have to float some payments for a period of time until a tenant gets in there. And so, it could be faster if you're in a really hot market, if you're charging below market rent. If you're in a great location, could be faster, more like in the 3 month, 1 to 3 month time frame. If you have a weird property in a strange location, or you want really high rent, just like apartments, it might be closer to that 12-month mark. And that's not a position I want to be in. I've never had a vacant building for 12 months. I hope I never do, but you do have to be well capitalized, and just kind of know your numbers and have a little bit of an extra financial buffer in case the unexpected does happen.
Yeah, so if someone's listening right now and they're like, "Hey, I'm interested in getting into commercial real estate," then what do you say are like the steps that they can follow to prepare themselves to get into real estate or commercial real estate?
Mm. First, start small. If you're cruising social media, reading books, or listening to podcasts, there might be this inclination for people to encourage you to go bigger, faster. I think that's awful advice for beginners. I think beginners should go small and, in some cases, stay small. So I would start paying attention to properties around you, properties that you've probably seen. You've probably seen those for sale or for lease signs in these little properties, maybe in the industrial part of town. Maybe it's this little building that it's nondescript but you see it all the time. It's by the grocery store or whatever, and maybe there's a phone number there. Maybe you might call the broker and ask what the deal is. Is it occupied? Is it vacant? Start asking some questions of people. What's the asking price? Oh, what would it rent for? Listening to podcasts and reading books to learn about how to underwrite. What kind of rent do I need to achieve the returns that I want? This is not an overnight learning process. I've been investing for 9 years and I'm still learning every day. And so I think it's important to not get cocky, not do too big of a deal before you're ready. Learn the lessons on the smaller deals. Like, if you're teaching pre-algebra, you're not starting out with the really hard problems. You're starting out with easy problems. You're starting out with x plus 2 equals 4. Solve for x. And so same thing with real estate. Start small, start on the easier stuff so you can learn your lessons because you're going to learn your lessons. And it is way better to learn those lessons on a small property where the stakes are low versus a big property where you've got your family's money and your friends' money and your neighbor's money. And the unexpected happens, and bad things can happen when you start using other people's money. And so I'd say start out with a small deal using your own money and get ready to learn some lessons.
Yeah, I have definitely learned many, many lessons in real estate, and I'm grateful that I don't have other people's money that I'm
Yeah.
being a steward of because it's a very stressful thing
Mhm.
uh, when you have lessons, on my own money, let alone on others. So that's huge. I really like that. Yeah, I think that's my little caption piece. You're going to learn your lessons. I think that's huge.
And a, a, a big problem with getting into real estate is people say, well, I don't have any money. How do I get into real estate without any money? And so a lot of gurus online will say, you don't need any money. You just borrow money. You borrow money from your friends and your family and your neighbors. And I think that's really questionable advice. I think if you're interested in getting into real estate, you need to save some money. You need to have good financial habits. You need to save money and invest money and grow your money. And you could also potentially partner with other people. And so, you're 50-50. Maybe you find a deal and your friend brings the money. And so you're equally in the deal. But I be very cautious, be very wary of anyone telling you to just get money from friends and family for your first deal because it can go south very easily.
Yeah, no, I think that's very important advice. I was definitely in the how can I get started without any money camp when I got started, and I'm more of like "Ah, I should probably wait till I have more money." That's an important thing, and it's hard, right? If you're listening to this and you're interested in this, there's that itch to get going, right? But put your foot on the brake, save some money, be well capitalized, have those things because you'll be able to handle the lessons you learn better when you have more money on hand. So there's a lesson I learned, in case you're wondering. All right. Got another question for you. Uh, what kind of criteria do you look at in the commercial property? I feel like we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but I just want to, like when you're analyzing one of these things, what do you look for? Because I feel like that's a little different than a residential property.
So financially, I like it to be cash flowing 10% on day one. And so I have my underwriting spreadsheet and I can plug the income numbers in and the lease numbers and the expenses. And I can calculate how much money I'm going to be making on day one. If it's cash flowing 10%, that gets me excited, gets me interested, gets me investigating it a little more. So that's one metric. Another something else I might look for is below market rents. If you're buying with below market rents, you're also probably buying at a low purchase price, which means you're covered if things get weird. So if the tenant leaves, if the economy takes a turn, if whatever unexpected thing happens, interest rates rise, um, you're covered when you buy at a low basis. And that's a low basis of a purchase price and a low basis for rent. And so when you're buying, top of market rent, top of market prices, it's a very fragile deal because anything can set that deal off and can derail it. And so when you buy great deals, you've got options if things go south. So yeah, those are a couple things that I look for. In addition to, being in the path of progress, being in a growing area, desirable area, a desirable building that is going to lease up if it goes vacant. So yeah, those are some of the things I look for.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's important to have like a baseline of what you're looking for. uh, financially, because if you don't have that, it's really easy to talk yourself into buying
Mhm.
something unless you say, is it meeting these criteria? Yes, yes, yes. Okay, I could buy it. Yes, yes, no. You negotiate or you walk away, right? That I think having a set criteria is really important for that reason.
Yeah, and Sean, you're talking about kind of the difference between being numbers based and data based and being emotional in your decisions. It's kind of tempting to get emotional, whether like you drive past a little apartment building and you're like, it's so cute. I love that building. I want to buy that building. Even though your numbers tell you this is not a good deal. You should not buy this. You get emotionally invested, or like you tour it and you're like, oh, I met the tenants and the tenants are awesome. There was this cute dog there, or it's on this street. I grew up on that street, or my uncle lives down the street. And so, like, these are all terrible reasons to buy a property. And so, yeah, just be very careful to not get emotionally invested in a deal and instead rely on your numbers.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Um, so I'm assuming that you have used leverage when buying your commercial properties. Most people use leverage when buying real estate. So I'm just wondering if you have like some way of thinking about it, or what people might need to know when they're gonna go into a bank mortgage for or a commercial loan for a commercial property.
Very important topic. We could talk for hours about getting commercial loans. So yes, I do. I have loans on almost all of my properties, and I generally buy with 75 or 80% LTV. That means I'm bringing 20 to 25% as a down payment. And some banks, if you put more down, you could get a better interest rate. Um, Also, these properties are not amortized over 30 years like a typical residential mortgage. These are typically amortized over 20 or 25 years. And there's a balloon payment. You sometimes have an option, but it's generally a 3, 5, or 7 year balloon. And so at the end of that 3, 5, or 7 year term, you have to pay it off, either paying it off in cash or refinancing it or selling it. And so at the end of that balloon, it's not going to be fully amortized, it's not going to be paid off. And so you have to think differently versus in a residential. At the end of your 30-year mortgage, it's paid off. You don't have to do anything. And so just kind of understanding and thinking a few steps ahead. So thinking about, if you have an opinion on where interest rates are going, if you believe you're buying a good deal, or are you buying at market? If you're buying at market or above market and then the market shifts, that's how people get underwater on their loans. And so, thinking critically about that. And then I also know people that do really well by having little to no leverage. They say, you know what, instead of having 10 properties that I leverage at 75%, I'm going to have one or two properties and I have no bank debt on them. I think that's a perfectly defensible strategy. There's just different factors. It would certainly be lower management. You could have some vacancy risk if you only have one or two properties versus having 10 properties. So yeah, those are some of the things to think about with commercial lending.
Awesome. Thank you. I realize that we could probably go into that, but we're just kind of skimming the surface, right? Just trying to get people to understand how this type of asset class would be different than investing in residential or real estate. Do you feel like it'd be better for someone to start with residential real estate to get their feet wet and then move into commercial, or could you start with commercial and be just fine?
It is the typical path to do residential first, get a single family rental, or like maybe it's your old house and instead of selling it, you choose to rent it. That's one way to get into the rental game and get some experience, or, buy a duplex, save some money, buy a duplex or a triplex. Very, very common way to get into real estate. That's how I got into real estate. I think that's how most people get into real estate. It's perfectly doable to get into commercial straight away. I would probably suggest finding a mentor. Maybe as a summer job, you're working at a commercial brokerage, and so you're learning the ropes that way. Um, it's residential is like, I think of it like you can learn residential by reading some books, listening to some podcasts, and you'd have enough information to be dangerous and to kind of feel your way through buying a duplex. But with a commercial property, I mean, you can learn for years and there'll still be stuff that you don't understand or that you're surprised by. And so I see commercial as like AP bio, like there's freshman bio, and then as a senior, you can take AP bio, and you realize, wow, there's a whole other world of bio here to learn. And so, could you go into AP bio straight away? Probably, but there's probably a base level knowledge that would be helpful to get from somewhere, whether it's from work experience or residential deals.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic way to think about it. I like the analogy of freshman bio versus AP bio. That's great. So if someone is wanting to get into commercial real estate, but they're worried about their limited time during the school year, do you feel like it's possible to move into this space even as we, kind of crunch a full job into 10 months and then some?
Yeah, side hustles are extra work. And so you kind of have to know yourself. If you have a full plate, if you're teaching full time and coaching, and you have two or three kids at home, I mean, that's already a lot on your plate. And maybe a side hustle isn't for you. Maybe it's your spouse that has a side hustle, or maybe it's just a summer side hustle or something like that. It is possible to have a property manager. Property managers charge in the commercial world, they can charge like in the 3 to 4% range. In the residential world, it's more like an 8 to 10% range. That's of gross revenue. And so if you've got a single family home and you're also paying a property manager 8 to 10% of your rent, that's a chunk. I was never willing to do that. I would rather have been busy and stressed than pay a property manager 8 to 10%. Not saying that's the right thing. That's the right mindset to have, but that was my mindset. And so understand that it's going to take work, it's going to take sacrifice, it's going to take some stress to get to where you wanted to go. But in my mind, it was worth it. I've been able to achieve more with real estate than I ever would have been able to teaching. It's, provided me financial freedom and time freedom and geographical freedom at times. And so it can, it's hardest earlier on, but as you get more experience and as you build your wealth later on in your investing journey, you can make different choices, like investing in net lease deals with lower management. Whereas my first deal was not a net leased deal with 10 years on the lease where I didn't have to do anything. My first deal was a really hairy single family flip that I had to put a bunch of money into, and things went wrong and I made some money, but it was also a lot of stress. But that was my summer job that year. And so, I would say just don't expect something for nothing.
Yeah, awesome. You mentioned the property managers for commercial doing a 3 to 4%. In in residential, my experience has been that the majority of property managers are not worth what you're paying them. There's just a whole bunch of really bad ones because it's pretty much like if you're a realtor, you can become a property manager, and that doesn't mean you're good at it. Uh, what's your experience been with property managers in the commercial space? What do they do? Do most of them do it effective, or is it a crapshoot? How does that go?
Property managers for commercial properties, especially larger, more expensive ones, tend to be a little more sophisticated than your average residential property manager. So, like you said, um, almost anyone with a pulse can be a residential property manager, and those people could technically be commercial property managers as well. But commercial property managers tend to be larger shops. They're often larger brokerages. These are brokerages that are regularly selling 5 and 10 and $20 million deals. And so there's a little more sophistication, but ultimately, they're not the owner, and nobody is going to take care of the building or care as much about the building as much as you as the owner will. And so I went through I've gone through periods of interviewing property managers where I was like in my transitional period where I was like, well, maybe I'll stick with residential, but I'll just go over to a property manager. And I start talking to property managers, and I'm just like, no, I am not giving my investment over to this person. And so, it's certainly buyer beware. Know that you, as the owner, will care the most about it, no matter what that property manager says when you're interviewing them. The amount of money, and it's interesting that you said, you're paying them a lot, and it's not worth it. From the property manager's perspective, they're not making that much. And so they're saying, like, well, you expect me to do all this work for almost no money? So, like, if rent on a single family house is $2,000 a month, you're going to pay that property manager $200 a month. And you want them to be totally on top of everything, doing inspections and monitoring the tenant and making sure everything is top notch. And the property manager is like, you want me to do all that for $200 a month? I'm not doing that. I'll keep the lights on and make sure they pay, but I'm not going above and beyond. And so that's kind of the conundrum, because to me as the owner, $200 out of my 2000 a month is a good chunk of money, but to the property manager it's not that much money. And so it's kind of it's a bit of a conundrum.
Yeah. Yeah, I personally think if you can find a way to not have a property manager and not stress yourself out at the same time, it seems like you're more likely to just get ahead and do better. But you have to have that system in place, whatever that looks like, to be able to manage it yourself and to not be running around like crazy and having all these calls constantly, which I have, a good system in place for three properties I own. They seem to be going well. And I think that system is mostly just buying in the right spot. And then I have one property that I I don't like this property. Listeners are aware of this property. And I've been there more times, in a month than I have been to all my other properties. Like it's a constant headache, constant things like that. So just keeping aware, like making sure you're doing this due diligence, you're choosing the property correctly, all these things, so that way you're not going to have the headaches later. It is a really great way to go about that. So, Jonathan, we're just going to start wrapping up here. Is there any blind spot or anything that we haven't talked about yet that you feel like someone would need to know as they're considering moving towards commercial real estate?
I think you've asked great questions. I'll just reiterate, starting small. And then something else that came to mind while you were talking is, a property manager might be a good choice for someone if you're going down this path and you tend to be a high anxiety kind of person. Like, you get bent out of shape very easily, and when things don't go your way, it really brings you down and stresses you out and leads you to freak out moments. When you're a real estate owner, things are going to go wrong. And so, how you respond to it, and like you mentioned, the system that you have in place, very, very important. But if you are going to be someone who freaks out every time you get a phone call, or someone's heater goes out, a property manager may be a perfectly good solution. But if you're someone who can be a good problem solver and stay even keeled, you can definitely do this. This is not rocket science. I was just a special ed teacher when I started, and I figured it out because I was willing to be a problem solver and willing to figure stuff out.
Just to add on to that, if you're wondering about the kind of problems you can experience as a property owner, in one year I had a sewer line break and bust open, and then I had a house get hit by a tornado. The same house got struck by lightning, and all of the appliances on the inside broke because the surge protector got overloaded or didn't trip. And then I had another property just recently where the fence got ran into by the police. So it's just like, and that's the last year.
Yeah.
Things go wrong all the time. Oh, and the AC unit went out. Anyway, so it's just like constant issues. Things come up. You have to be ready to handle those and to be scrappy sometimes and have the capitalization you're talking about so you can pay for those things, etc. Like it's not the easiest way to become financially independent, but there's a lot of powerful levers that make it, just like skyrocket, even with all these problems.
Yeah, yeah, great points. And you'll learn some lessons. It sounds like you've learned a million lessons on that deal, and so you've probably learned things about what you'll look for in your due diligence period next time, the locations that you want to buy in, and how much money you have budgeted for capital expenses and things like that. And you learn these lessons by doing deals. You can read books and listen to podcasts, but you'll only learn so many lessons by doing that. If you want to learn how to do it and learn the right way to do it, you do deals. You can partner with other people, come alongside someone else who maybe has the money but not the time. You've got the time, and then you can tag team it, and you can learn that way. So there are ways to do it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, Jonathan, for coming on the show today. I just got two more questions for you. I know that you're not actively doing your podcast right now on commercial real estate, but if someone has a question or they want to reach out to you, is there a way that they can contact you?
Sure. You can go to my website. It's jonathanhayek.co. My email should be on there, and a contact form. And so you can contact me there.
Awesome. And then my last question is, what is your number one tip for teachers to have a richer wallet classroom in life?
Get more education, get that master's degree, and initially live below your means. Save more than you think you should, and live below your means.
I love it. All right. Jonathan, thank you for coming on the show. This has been a ton of fun.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
Wow, wasn't that a great episode? Thank you, Jonathan, so much for coming on the show. Now it's time for my cliff notes, my top takeaways from this episode. I really loved how he kind of told us to put the foot on the brake, right? Slow down, start small, don't go all in, right? There are lots of opportunities in commercial real estate, but you don't have to jump into the high level. You can start small. There's opportunities at the low level in the 150 to $200,000 range. You don't have to buy where you're at. You can buy somewhere else, but slow down before you even start buying. Learn. Start with just understanding how this works. And then, even if you have to work a part-time job in a commercial brokerage or something like that, or buy a small residential property, whatever it takes to learn the process, that is where you start. Uh, a couple other things that I think are really, really powerful is that commercial, it's kind of like the AP bio, right? It is the next level up, but there's a lot of benefits to it. There's not really a lot of downsides. He didn't really point out downsides. Like, there's vacancy, which it could be vacant longer. But if you buy right, it won't really be vacant much longer, and it will probably not go vacant as often as a single family home would. So there's a lot of benefits if you understand it and you do it right going in, and you have that triple net lease that's putting more money into your pocket. I would love to have a triple net lease on a couple of my properties right now. It's very, very nice to have that. The only way you can do that in residential is to do some sort of like a rent to own situation. It's very similar to a triple net lease, which I know some people are very successful with. Maybe I need to talk to somebody about how to do that. Uh, the next thing is how to buy and how to keep your tenants. So his thoughts on how to buy are to look for cash flow, 10% on day one, below market rents, so you can slowly raise the rents, and have a low purchase price. So these things are going to keep you in the black if something goes south. And then choose a good location, path of progress. It looks good. It's in an infill. It's in the city, so that way there's people that are more likely to want it. And then what you do once you have the property is you want to keep those tenants, keep the rent as low as possible, below that market rate if you can after you buy. Just be a fair landlord, a fair negotiator, and then making sure you have a desirable location and keeping it up so that way it stays desirable so you aren't losing tenants. I want to emphasize something. Commercial real estate is not a how do I get in with no money situation. It is a make sure you have a good financial cushion. If you want to take your investments to the next level, commercial real estate can be really, really powerful. But if you don't have a good financial cushion, I wouldn't do it. I've been thinking about getting into commercial real estate. I've been wanting to learn, but this is my learning period. I am not in the let's go buy commercial real estate phase because I don't have the capitalization right now that I'd like to be able to be protected if I get into commercial real estate. So before you do, make sure you follow that advice. You are not the exception here. Follow his advice. We also talked about debt. He said you can be really successful without debt. So if you can like save up and purchase outright a property, the cash coming into your pocket can be fantastic. But on the other hand, you can't move as fast and you have some vacancy problems. So just make sure that you have a good chunk that you're ready to put into the property. So that way you aren't trying to do a minimum amount down. That way you are able to get the best rates and get the right cash flow on those properties. And be aware that the way that the amortization works is a little different. I think those are all great points for understanding how debt works with commercial real estate. And then lastly, we talked about managing the properties and how that works. So if you have that triple net lease, it should be pretty straightforward. So that's what you're working towards. Property managers can work. They can tend to be very, high end, but they still will not care as much as you do. So if you are trying to get into real estate in any form, remember that you have to care and you have to manage the manager if you have a manager, if not, just manage it yourself. So that way your properties get taken care of. These are all fantastic things to keep in mind with commercial real estate. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you liked it, please send me an email, Sean, SHAUN, at teachermoneyshow.com. Or if you have a suggestion for another type of episode or another topic you want to learn about or a guest that you want to hear from, please reach out to me. I want to hear it. You can find the show notes for how to reach out to Jonathan and other things for this episode at teachermoneyshow.com/podcast. I put the show notes for each show on that page. And if you go to the link in the description, you can go directly to the show notes for this show as well. And as you are considering, should I get into commercial real estate? Should I just, keep investing in my 403b or IRA or whatever? Remember that as a teacher, you are already rich. Your wallet just needs to catch up.
If you would like help on your personal financial situation, go to teachermoneyshow.com/coaching and you'll be able to find different ways that I can help you there. If you would like to participate in spreading this message of financial empowerment to teachers, I would encourage you to talk to your administrator or to your district level about going to seankmorgan.com to find more information there. And regardless of which one of those you need, please like and subscribe so that way we can spread the reach of this more. Leave a 5-star rating and review. That's going to help more teachers find this. And then turn around and tell a teacher friend. I really appreciate it.
The contents of this podcast are informational in nature and are not legal or tax advice, and neither I nor my guests are engaged in the provision of legal, tax, or any other advice. You should not act upon this information without first seeking appropriate advice from an accountant, financial planner, lawyer, or other professional.